I'm Karla Erickson. I'm a professor of sociology. I want to offer some of the tools I've learned through my own study of American racial projects and critical race studies to consider last week's white nationalist siege and coup attempt in Washington, D.C. There's a long history of armed, largely white, largely male mobs expressing white resentment throughout the history of this country. There is a long history of people who perceived themselves as white grieving and then violently protesting minor gains or access to resources by people they perceive as not white. This is because white entitlement is central to the perpetuation of white supremacy. Despite the reality of multiracial democracy that now characterizes American life, built into white supremacy itself is the promise of white exceptionalism, a story of white specialness that is narrated, defended, and passed down. This entitlement is not merely imaginary, but has material and safety consequences, both for the people who are believed to be white and those who are not. People who defend whiteness often take up arms when they perceive that the uneven access whiteness has extended to them is under threat. In this most recent case, you can see the sense of entitlement in the voices of the insurrectionists who said, "This is our house," regarding the Capitol building. There is also a long history of police forces collaborating with, tolerating, or even fueling armed actions meant to defend whiteness. While we do not know how and how broadly the tepid and slow reaction to the mob's violence was intentionally slow and ineffective, what we know with certainty is this. Enforcement of a group of insurrectionists, many of whom were armed and many of whom were dressed in war gear and paramilitary gear, was wrapped in the presumption of white innocence. The presumption of white innocence is pernicious and widespread. It has many features, some subtle, some deadly. It is used routinely by people who are perceived as white of all genders and ages, and it also is often internalized by people who are perceived as non-white. It is one of the pillars of white supremacy, and it is the counterpoint and necessary ideological partner to the presumption of Black criminality. These paired perceptions of the bodies to which presumptions of innocence can be attached and the bodies to which suspicion and force should be applied will be useful now as we make sense of how Black Lives Matter protests in the same city were met with police dogs and mounted police as compared with the lack of preparation and late response to the intended and anticipated violence that occurred in DC last week. Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo told the Washington Post that he worried that a lack of preparation was rooted in police's perception of the crowd. He said officers might have seen a largely white group as inherently less hostile. It will take considerable investigation to untangle the choices, delays, and jurisdictional disputes that might have allowed a group of insurrectionists who had so clearly pronounced their intentions on a variety of online spaces that were monitored by intelligence officers in a mere 26 minutes to breach one of the central symbols of American democratic process. Until that hard work of unraveling the minute-by-minute failures to contain the violence is done, in the meantime, we have the tools developed by critical race theorists, Black studies scholars, historians, sociologists, and others who study and make it their life's work to study racism and the sustenance of racial thinking. More recently, we have all the tools that have been developed by members of the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the most organized and educated forces in recent years. Thanks in part to the incredible work of all these groups, one of our highest elected officials, President-elect Joe Biden, was able to immediately recognize the disparity in how this summer's protests against white supremacy were managed and policed as compared to the approach on January 6th, when the actual white supremacists came with the intent to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. One is an act of legal protest. The other is an insurrection, yet the police responded with mismatched and inappropriate actions in both cases. These two paired tropes, Black criminality and white innocence, sustained over hundreds of years, seamlessly influence seeing, perceiving, and reacting. It will be crucial to be vigilant now about how the aftermath of this event is handled. Such scrutiny should include the number and breadth and depth of charges against the white nationalists who attacked the Capitol, the follow-through to get charges to stick, and the increased support for monitoring one of the greatest security threats to this country, domestic white national terror. The trope of white innocence is multifaceted, and it can adhere to every step of the sense-making process of these crimes. First, the initial response to the violence, and now the whole process of indicting, punishing, and framing the crimes. Unlike the presumption of Black criminality, the presumption of white innocence includes the basic credit given to white actors. Perhaps this shows up in a job interview or first date. Yeah, he did miss that second question we asked him, but he seems like a good guy. Or in response to a minor aggression or violation of occupational conduct. That's weird that he acted like that. He's usually pretty cool. This sort of benefit of the doubt is extended in everyday interactions and becomes concretized and material in a lot of ways. Who gets hired, who gets sanctioned, who gets a pass, who has to apologize, and who is viewed as predatory. On the more extreme end, the presumption of white innocence protects white people disproportionately from facing the consequences of their own actions, be this whether or not they get a ticket for light speeding on an average Tuesday morning, to the consequences for higher crimes, including rape, domestic abuse, and insurrection. In subtle and overt ways, people who are perceived as white learn that they can sometimes get away with mistakes and even crimes, especially when they know someone in power. So while it is incredibly important to pay attention to the other half of these paired presumptions, Black criminality and the weight it presses on people perceived as Black to be treated so often with hostility, excessive scrutiny, suspicion, and police control of their movements, it is equally important to pay attention to the welcome, the tolerance, the exceptions, the benefit of the doubt, the slow or delayed action taken in response to people who are perceived as white as they move through the world. The work of a liberal arts education is to help bright young students from around the world to do the hard work of studying disciplines, distant cultures, and comparative views, so that their imaginations are conditioned to see their world anew, to recognize patterns, motivations, possibilities, both good and ugly, that they couldn't have seen when they were steeped in their own upbringing. In sociology, we use C. Wright Mill's notion of the sociological imagination. In 1959, he described this as if suddenly awakened in a room with which they had supposed themselves to be familiar. Patricia Hill Collins calls it the ability to see past in the present. It is crucial that we use what we have learned from past white national violence and the everyday violence white supremacy requires to sustain a racial system designed to provide unearned access, second and third choices, and a tolerance for outrageous, violent, and illegal behavior, and bring that knowledge to bear on the attempted coup of last week. As Ta-Nehisi Coates pointed out in his 2017 award-winning Atlantic essay, Trump has built his political career on stretching the limits of white unaccountability. Trump himself was clear about this before he was elected. At a campaign rally in Sioux City, Iowa in January of 2016, he said, "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue, shoot someone, and not lose any voters." Then he made the shape of a gun and said, "It is incredible." Such is the power of a sense of white entitlement to be violent, criminal, and go unpunished that he believes is his birthright, and in which he colludes with other white nationalists to fuel and act out their sense of entitlement to special treatment. We need not wait until all the competing forces have been unraveled and identified to know that the presumption of white innocence and the repeated failure to frame white nationalist-inspired violence as a threat to national security was part of what made our capital a capital that belongs to all of us, vulnerable to this organized violence.